Hi, hello, welcome back to the next lesson. I hope you got value out of the Holy Week lesson, and naturally after Holy Week comes Easter. So what we want to talk to you about now is what Easter is, why it's so important, why the church gives so much attention to it, and really it all makes perfect sense if you go back again to that story of salvation history. So what I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you what I call the 4 plans. And that'll give us a quick summary of salvation, and it'll show us at the end why Easter is so important to us as Catholics. So the starting point is what we call the original plan. Now the original plan is very simple and straightforward. God made man out of love and loves man perfectly. Man in turn was made and created for the sole purpose of loving God. And if that sequence was followed, we would have a wonderful, perfect life with God, everything would be marvelous, and we would be fulfilling our destiny as human beings. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. So after we sinned, we entered what I'm calling the broken plan. And in the broken plan, God still creates man out of love. And God still loves man perfectly, because God is unchanging, and nothing God does changes. So God still creates us, God still loves man perfectly. Man, however, refuses to love God back and refuses God's love. That's what sin is a refusal of God's love. The result is man dies, as said in Genesis. Do not eat the fruit lest you should die. And so we die, 1, because it's the punishment for sin. Death is what you get when you have sin. And 2, death because we rejected what it means to be human. We were made to love God, and we rejected that. So if we are rejecting the purpose for our existence, what is left except for death? This is a horrible plan. Really, this plan means there is no hope for a single human being in all of time, space, creation, eternity. Nobody has any chance or possibility of hope or salvation. Everything ends in death. Fortunately for us, God does not leave us in the broken plan. He could have. He could have said, well, you screwed up, too bad, tough to be you. But because of his great love for us, he gave us another plan, which we call Jesus' plan. And this was to fix the broken plan. Now this is where it gets interesting. So God sends his son, Jesus, who is both God and man. Not a hybrid, not a mixture. He's fully God and fully man. So he's got everything that every other human being on the earth has, minus sin. And that's important because every other human being is born into sin. So they have to follow the broken plan because they have to pay that debt for sin. And the way we pay our debt is through death. So every other human being has to be created and then die to pay their debt for sin. Jesus, on the other hand, is a man who has no sin. And he's also God. So when Jesus follows our broken plan and he dies, even though he doesn't have to, he dies and he is literally able to take on every sin in the entire world, past, present, and future. Because he's God, and God is big enough, God can handle that. So he literally takes on the entire sin of every person in the human race who was and is to come. And not only does he take on that sin, he then resurrects from the dead and gains new life and is able to return back to God. So what Jesus has done is he has made a path for us back to God through death. So in many ways, death is a stepping stone. And that brings us to the final plan. So then finally, after Jesus, we get to the new plan. And the new plan is what we are all living now. And the new plan is the reason Easter is such a big deal for us. Because in the new plan, God still creates man out of love. Because remember, God's unchanging, nothing changes with God. So he still creates man out of love and creates man to love and be loved by God. Man is still born into sin and still owes that debt of death for his sin. That doesn't change. However, now, because of Jesus, man can die in union with Christ. And then, having paid his debt to sin through death, can also gain new life in Christ. So that we can love God back with Christ the way we were originally created to do so. Another way to think of this is if you imagine a jungle. There's no trails or paths in a jungle at all. You're just there. Before this plan, man was just plopped into the jungle and there was no way out. Jesus came into that jungle and made a path out so that we could follow it with him. And that's what's happening here, is because Jesus died and because Jesus rose, we can do the same thing and make our way back to God. And that's why Easter is such a big deal, because the resurrection is the final linchpin that gives us a path back to God. It fixes the problem of sin. If there was no resurrection, then we really wouldn't care too much about what Jesus did. It wouldn't matter because it wouldn't have fixed very much at all. But the resurrection changes everything, because now, yes, we still have to die to pay payment for sin, but that death can be our stepping stone to get back to God, so we can do what we were created to do as human beings. And that's what makes Easter so important. And then from there, it should be pretty simple why we celebrate it for so long. But let's talk about that next. All right, so Easter lasts for 50 days. That's a long time. That's the longest feast day. That's the longest length of feasting in the church. There is no other celebration or feast in the church that is as long as Easter. And the reason for that, it makes perfect sense if you think about it. We make time and give time to what we find to be important. How often have you said to one of your kids or to a friend, if this was important to you, you would make time for it? I'm sure you've all heard that phrase at some point along the way. And it's true. If something is important to us, we make time for it. And if something is less important to us than other things, time is not made for it. It's just the way we are as human beings. And that's why it is in the church. We give the most time to the most important things. And this, Easter, is the most important thing. Nothing else in the church matters if this isn't the case. Without this, the whole Catholic faith unravels and there's no point, and we're all lost in despair and agony, and it's bad. It's bad. So we give Easter 50 days to show how important it is and to remember how important this is. And then we cap it off with Pentecost at the end, because that's when the church finds its birthday. And the church is important because that is what we use to continue sharing that message of what Jesus did. That's how we share the new plan with people, is through the church. And you and I have a role in that. But 50 days because we give time to what is important.